Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for the webinar this evening, which has been hosted by AHDB Beef and Lamb. My name's Amy Fawcett and I'm the Knowledge Transfer Officer for Beef and Lamb within AHDB. I'm absolutely delighted to bring you tonight's webinar on optimising lamb performance, and our speaker this evening is Lesley Stubbings, Independent Sheep Consultant. So the plan of action this evening is that Lesley will run through a presentation and then there'll be time for questions at the end. You guys will all stay muted throughout the webinar, but if anybody would like to ask any questions, then if you just want to type them into the box on the right hand side of your screen, when Lesley's finished the presentation, I'll go through and read out the questions. So we've got over 70 people registered for the webinar this evening, and I'd just like to thank Elena, who's working behind the scenes to keep all the technology running smoothly. If we do encounter any problems, just bear with us, but we'll obviously try and keep these to a minimum. So without further delay, I'll hand over to Lesley.
Thanks there, Amy. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this webinar this evening. I guess optimising lamb performance for the season, like we've had so far, we've had a really good flying start, and hopefully over the next half an hour or so, we'll put a little bit of meat behind that as to why it is so important that lambs do get a good start. So if we can just have a look at the first slide. I guess the question I get asked a lot when we talk about lamb performance is just how important is growth rate anyway? Because if we look at the sort of normal pattern, I'm not sure the word normal's right these days, but if we look at the 5-year average or the other years and where we are starting this year, then the argument that I often hear from sheep producers is, well, surely it doesn't really matter if my lambs don't finish in the sort of back end of the summer, early autumn period, because that's when prices are lowest. I can just keep them through the winter and wait for the price to rise. And yeah, that could be a legitimate argument in some ways, but what I really want to do this evening is to just explain to you what the cost of that is, not just in terms of finishing the lambs, clearly there is a cost there, but to the system as a whole. Because it is really important that we do get the best out of our lambs in the first 8 weeks and then up to 90 days. We're going to concentrate on 8 weeks more this evening, but it is really important. The next objection I usually get is, well, if we all finished our lambs really, really quickly, the price in the summer would be worse still. Well, I wish, and I'm sure AHDB would wish, that everyone was listening to the messages. Those of you who are on the webinar tonight are a few who want to really improve things, and I don't think that you getting it right is going to make a massive difference to the marketplace. So no place to hide there either. So we're going to talk about growth rate, but we're also going to talk about minimising the stragglers as well, and I am going to refer to the KPI project as we go through. So let's just have a look at some of the consequences, if you like, of us not getting the growth rate. So if we just look at this next slide, this is looking at the efficiency of lamb performance, and basically how much food does it take, sorry, my phone's supposed to be muted, how much food does it take to actually fuel that growth rate at different levels of growth rate. So here what we've got along the bottom of the graph are average growth rates per day from 100 grams a day to, from 100 grams a day through to 400 grams a day. But let's just have a look at 100 to 300, because as you'll see, that's a more normal sort of range that we might see with lambs over a season. And at the right hand side, we've got the efficiency with which food is used. And here we've got at 100 grams a day, only an 8% efficiency. At 300 grams a day, nearly 16%. And in round terms, what that really means is that if a lamb reaches 40 kilos, if it does it at 300 grams a day, it will take half as much food, half as much energy than it will do if it does it at 100 grams a day. And that really is a massive difference, and something that we need to be looking at very carefully with regard to flock management as a whole. Knock-on effects of this, one of the really important ones, and one of the issues I think that we need to be teeing ourselves up for now and really all year round, is the importance of ewe body condition. And if our lambs do really well and we get to weaning, that will mean that there's more feed available for weaned ewes, more dry matter available to be able to put body condition back onto our ewes in the run-up to topping. Now, with the Key Performance Indicator project, we just know now how important that is, because we can actually follow the results through, and certainly the preliminary analysis suggests that if we get it right in the weaning to topping period, then the benefits are seen all the way through to the 8-week weight of the next crop of lambs. So it is really important that this knock-on effect of potentially having more available for our ewes in that period is taken into consideration. And of course, the other alternative is, if we finish our lambs quicker and there's more dry matter and grazing available, then we may be able to keep more ewes on the same ground. And given that we're always being told, quite rightly, that overheads are one of our major costs, a 5 or 10% increase in ewe numbers over the same overheads makes a massive difference to the cost per ewe. So any permutation, but it isn't all about just growth rate and getting lambs away quickly. It's the knock-on effects that has. And of course, finishing lambs itself costs money. It's rare that you see people really taking all of that into consideration, but whether you put a forage crop in or you house them, whatever, there is a cost to doing that. And it's really easy not to factor that into your final sums when you might get £90 a lamb, but actually you've spent £25 a lamb getting there, and you could have got 65 quid for it as a store earlier in the season. So there is a cost associated with it. So I would argue that it is very important that lambs grow quickly in the early stages of life. I'm hoping everyone online tonight agrees with that. And we can then move on and start to ask ourselves the next question, which is, well, how fast is fast? How fast should they be growing? How much do we know about how fast they can grow? And what are the downsides of them not reaching those targets? So just having a look at this is an example of a graph that we've been taking out of the border software actually that we're using in the KPI project. And every little cross on there is a lamb's weight. So this graph simply puts all of the lambs. Across the bottom we've got months. So here we've got, this would be the equivalent of 8 weeks. That should come up here, 56 days. And this one is 90 days. Where we've been round about there, been weaning the lambs on the project. And these lines here are our target growth rates. And we've got 300 grams a day, we've got 350 grams a day, and we've got 400 grams a day. Now, you can look at this and there's all sorts of things you can learn from it. The first thing I would say I learned when we started to be able to produce these graphs is just how much variation there is. The big thick lines are, if you like, the average, and you can see there that with this flock we're keeping around about the 300 grams a day mark nearly all the way through, which is good. When you start to see a lot of flocks, what you find is that they're dipping down below the 250 grams a day, which is the lower pink line, and then you begin to ask what's going on, why is that happening? But equally, we need to be also understanding why some of these lambs are doing so well, and possibly more importantly, why are these lambs doing so badly. So the sorts of targets that we're looking at then, if we look at that graph again, and these are targets that we've been pulling out and we've now got a lot of data to support them, is at 56 days, we will be looking for twin lambs to be reaching around about 20 kilos. To do that, they have to grow at this 300 grams a day mark right away from birth. And then at weaning, at 90 days, we're looking for lambs to be getting towards the 30 kilo mark. And then again, that's reflected in the fact that it's 300 grams a day. So arguably, you might say they're not very high targets. But when we look at data sets, there are a lot of lambs that aren't actually achieving that on farm. So looking at that again slightly differently, we can also begin to graph that, and this is an example for one of our KPI flocks for last year actually, the whole flock, so this would represent something like 1,700 lambs, graphed out, the 20 kilos there being our target, and now we can begin to see this variation around it. We have lambs that are way above, and clearly up here these are going to be more single lambs. But the ones that we've also been concentrating on are down here, are the ones that aren't making the 20 kilos. And just to be clear, these are adjusted 56-day weights, so it does take into account that some of the lambs are actually younger. And what we're finding is that this area here is very important. Lambs that are 85% or less of the target 20 in this period never make up the ground that they've lost up to 8 weeks. And so in its own right, we're beginning now to talk about this 17 kilo, sub 17 kilo lamb at 56 days, and the number of them in a flock as actually being a key performance indicator, the percentage of them being a key performance indicator. And then what we find, so here we had an average of 21, which was great. You would say absolutely no problem, but the danger of averages is that it's actually hiding a lot of this variation further down, and these are the ones that are really going to lose us the profit later on. If we look at 90 days in this flock, again the average isn't quite making the 30. It's still falling a little bit short of that magic 30, much better than it was to start with, but again the key is in some of the variation. And what we find, and I'll show you a graph in a minute, is that if we pull out these lambs and graph them, then we can see that they were down there here, they're still down there at 90 days. So what's going on? Well, this is some quite old work actually, and it fits in with what we've learned in this project. And what it's basically saying is that if we have lambs that are about a third of their mature weight, up to about 30% of their mature weight, and we actually stress them and reduce their energy intake below where they need to be for optimum growth, even if we speed them up later on, we're only going to get about a 76% recovery afterwards, so they can only compensate for about 76% of the loss. Whereas older lambs, store lambs, being the, you know, as we would expect them to be, they can begin to get near 100% compensation if we give them enough energy again. So some very old work supports what the KPI project has been finding. And just to put that into perspective for you, here's 30%. We're actually slaughtering our lambs at about 50% of their mature weight. So, you know, we are talking at more than half of their growth period as lambs up to slaughter at this point in time. If we do actually reduce the amount of energy below what they really need for optimum growth, we're never going to get it back again. So I said a minute ago that I would pull some of these lambs out, and in the next graph, here we have it again. All I've done here is to go back into the spreadsheets and say, right, okay, just pull out these little guys here, all of whom were below our target, at an adjusted weight at 8 weeks. They were below. What happened to them? And you can see it's a pretty well a flat line. They really don't pick up. Here they're still down there, and even further on, they're way below target. So probably what you always thought, but now we can actually show just how important it is that we try and hit these targets. So again, some work that was done quite a long while ago, looking at the physiology of what's going on, what's this energy restriction really doing, because I think it helps to understand. We don't see any effect on the early maturing organs, so things like brain and eyes and so on, that's not a problem. Where we do start to see an issue in these young lambs that are stressed up to the 30% mark is that the key organs such as the liver and the intestine are reduced in size. So their ability to actually take feed on later on is limited and stunted. And also the capacity of the muscles to reach mature size is reduced. So it begins to explain why we see these stunted lambs, and also laying down fat laying down more fat at a similar stage of maturity. So I think we can explain what's going on physiologically as well. So in terms of that then, just to look at a different flock within and just to show you the difference that it can make. These are 90-day weights for 2 different years, 2013 and 2015, just to pick out some of the progress that's been made. You can see here in 2013 the average was only 24 kilos, and they're huge numbers of lambs below the 30, but also a massive spread. In 2015, still not reached the magic 30, but getting there. But I also want to draw your attention to the fact that one of the big differences is there's a lower variation because the effort was put in to try and avoid these small lambs that were running into trouble at an early stage. So let's look at some of the factors, okay, that are involved in this, just so that perhaps you can go away and have a think about where your first limiting factor may be. And obviously we've got to consider something about the ewe herself, and there are also going to be lamb factors. So I just want to run through some of these. Clearly we haven't got time to go through everything in great detail, but we can come back to some of them in questions later on. If we think about the lamb first, there's a heck of a lot of factors that will affect how lambs grow. We'll come to the ewe in a minute, and we have, as I say, we haven't got time to cover all of these. I'll mention one or two health things in a minute. Obviously genetics plays a part. The lamb has to have the genetic ability in the first place, but being absolutely brutal about it, in most situations in commercial flocks, we are nowhere near harnessing the genetic potential of what these lambs can do. So I'm not really thinking that in the early stages, most of us are having this as our glass ceiling. Ewe nutrition and body condition score is very important, and I'm going to come on to that in a minute. Trace elements, wasn't going to go into any detail, but if people have got specific questions, then we can try, well, I will try certainly to cover some of those off. But let's have a look at the ewe nutrition and body condition score to start with. And let's start by having a look at the energy sources for twin lambs, and you'll find this diagram in the new Feeding the Ewe book that has just been printed. And this is really important, and I think it's a bit that perhaps we've ignored over the years. We all talk very, very much about how much ewe milk yield is important to young lambs, and obviously it is. So if we look at this, this is ewe milk production and the amount of energy available to twin lambs from a ewe, ewe's milk, to their requirement. And here we've got what the lamb actually needs, what the lamb takes in terms of energy and needs in terms of energy to support an optimum growth rate. And let's just have a look at this bit here, because clearly up until just over 3 weeks, somewhere between 3 and 4 weeks of age, then ewe milk is everything. The lamb, if the ewe's not milking, then the lamb is just not going to grow very well. And we'll come back to this other stage in a minute. So the nutrition of the ewe is going to be absolutely critical. Her ability to have the lamb, a vigorous lamb that's capable of getting up and suckling and taking advantage of what she's got available, but also whether or not she's able to support a high level of milk yield in that first stage. Now, you will have seen this before, and obviously the ewe isn't going to do that simply off her back, and neither is she going to be able to do it unless she's got grazing in front of her. So it goes without saying then that we do need to, where sward heights are limited, then we do need to be thinking in terms of additional concentrate supplement to try to support that ewe in her milk yield. But I think those of you who've done that, and this year probably is one of the exceptions that we've had for a long time, those of you who try to do that will realise that it is actually really difficult when grass is really short and we're down at 3 centimetres. To try and bridge that gap by feeding concentrates is difficult. And it's at that point that the ewe body condition score really begins to kick in. Above 4 centimetres, reliably above 4 centimetres, then there is enough dry matter available there, and the ewe can eat and she can support that maximum milk yield directly off grazing. But in terms of body condition score, how does this affect how lambs grow? And the answer is, it depends on the year. Now, what you've got in front of you here is a bit of a blobby diagram, really, but this is one of the KPI flocks. And I just really want to, this is 3 years worth of data. This is the body condition score, and this is the frequency in each of these years. This is what the flock looked like in each of those 3 years. I just want you to look here at the moment at lambing for this particular one. You can see in the first year here, when we actually started the project, the body condition score of this flock on the whole was a bit below where we would ideally want it to be. A lot of ewes in this 2.5, 2 3/4, just around about 3 body condition score, a little bit below par. And in that year, it wasn't a particularly good spring, and we saw the result of that in lower 8-week weights. The following year, after a lot of hard work to get the body condition score up, we had ewes in much better body condition, and we had a 30% increase in the 8-week weight of the lambs, irrespective of whether it was good spring or not. And then last year we had another drop in body condition score, and again grazing last year, I think anybody remembers back to last spring, it wasn't the best spring that we've ever had, and again we saw a slight drop in 8-week weights of the lambs. Now if we take data sets across a lot of flocks, what we find is that where body condition score is really important is in those years when grazing is tight. And then what you see is the better ewes have the better lambs, and the worse ewes have the worse lambs. And that's where I think we need to begin to start prioritising grazing, in that probably shearlings and older ewes that aren't in such good body condition score, where grazing is limited, we prioritise them, and that will help us to reduce the impact of grass supply on their milk yield. So ewe milk yield, really, really important, and ewe body condition score is important because, of course, even though this year, if we look at it, we probably will see that body condition has had less effect because the grass has been there, we don't know what the spring is going to be like. So your ewe body condition score is really your insurance policy. It's making it robust. So very important. Some years you'll utilise it more than others. Now, if we get to this next stage here, beyond about 3.5, 4 weeks, the jaws of that graph there, the difference between what the lamb needs to grow and what it's actually going to get from its mother, gets wider and wider and wider. And then it's a question of how we bridge that gap. And it's failing to do that that produces a lot of these small lambs. So this was actually a video I took the other day, but we can't support that. I don't think everyone's broadband would hold it. It was a bit creaky. But these are clearly quite young lambs. We can still see navels there. And they were grazing avidly. I videoed them and they were really tucking in. And so again, they need to graze at this stage. If they can't graze, then, and we don't give them creep feed, they're not going to support a maximum growth rate. So really important that we appreciate that, as well as providing ewes with the right grazing, those lambs are going to need to have a good short nutritious sward to go at. If they haven't, then the question is, and this is one of the most common questions I get asked, is should I creep feed or shouldn't I creep feed? If you know that the jaws of that graph are there and you cannot supply the grazing and the ewe's not going to be able to keep up beyond 4 weeks, then to keep the growth rate, the answer is probably yes, because even though it's going to cost, and even if you don't do it for a long period of time, and just doing it until the lambs have got grazing in front of them and can support themselves, you will support that growth rate. Yes, it's more expensive. If we look at the cost of a megajoule of energy from a creep feed or a compound nut, as it's there in that diagram, as opposed to grazed grass, it's going to cost us nearly 5 times more. So the message from that is it's always going to pay us to try and do it by improving grazing management, improving the availability of grass, possibly rotationally grazing, and improving grassland. But if it's not there, then creep is the next best thing, and we shouldn't be frightened to use it if it's necessary. So other things that are going to affect us, obviously worms will reduce growth rates, and that's a story for another time, but we can have a 50% reduction in growth rate without seeing any clinical signs. And where lambs are grazing early, then obviously at an early stage they're also going to be picking up worms. And our main worries at this time of year are going to be nematodirus. This year, we've had a very early hatch. Unfortunately for a lot of lambs, the nematodirus will have been and gone and done that before they are really in the firing line. But nematodirus is always a risk. They're going to be picking that up. And obviously coccidiosis is the other one that we would consider, particularly where lambs are being grazing close, and also when you start creep feeding, that can become more of a risk. So other things that can affect lambs and lamb growth rate, I think, just teeing up really for any questions. Clearly things like scald are a major issue. When we're recording growth rates in great detail, you can almost see where there's been a scald outbreak in a group of lambs because the group growth rate drops off very quickly. Pastoralosis is clearly going to affect lambs. The ones that don't die, there's going to be an awful lot more who are stunted and affected. And I've already had several cases in flocks this year with these temperatures zooming up and down as they are. There's going to be quite a bit of challenge out there from pastoralosis. And things like joint ill as well. We can come back to those in questions if you wish. So these 90-day waits then, just to sort of really reiterate this to you, that what we also see is quite a lot of people, they don't do too badly up to 8 weeks, and then beyond 8 weeks up to the 90-day mark, things really flatten off. It almost starts to pancake. And that has been one of the big challenges within the project, has been to raise the 3 farms we've been working with and keep that growth rate going. And we've done that through good worm control, a good start, and improving grazing. So keeping that going and keeping that sward height and measuring and keeping the dry matter covers in front of lambs and prioritising lambs is absolutely critical. And in this next graph, you can really see why. It's a very simple graph that's taken actually from some New Zealand work. But if we just look at lamb live weight gain here and the sorts of feeds that we can see here, the New Zealand here, look, baleage, the sorts of feeds that we can actually put in front of them, so the energy value of the diet, then we're going to be losing weight on dead stem and 50% dead stem with a little bit of clover. Average ryegrass growing, some clover growing in it in around about here. Well, yeah, okay, we might get 100, 150 grams a day, but we've got to be up into the good quality stuff here to be able to be supporting the 300 grams a day, which is where we're suggesting those sorts of targets would be. So, silk purses, sow's ears, whatever we want to think about it, we have to be putting this quality of grazing in front of our lambs if we want to keep that growth rate going. So just thinking then about having objectives and targeting, I think one of the main things about tonight's webinar is really sort of, I think, to introduce to people what the targets are. And it is about growth rate, but it is also about not just looking at averages. I would really encourage people, you don't need the really fancy kit to be able to do all of this. It helps when you're doing thousands of them, I can promise you, but you don't really need that. You could go out and just weigh a selection of lambs at 8 weeks and at least get an idea of what your best lambs are doing and maybe what the lower end lambs are doing. But I would really encourage you, if you can, to go out and weigh a whole batch of lambs and have a look at this. How many of them are 80, 85% or less of my target? Because it's in those lambs that possibly there's as much to be gained from trying to push the average up. And I hope that that makes sense to everyone who's listening. Now, there we are, and so there we are, again, a graph of the 8 weeks with the 20 kilos, with the 20 kilos as our target. But really, if we can weigh a good number, and preferably all of them, and start looking at, yeah, that's great, we've got a lot over 20, probably a lot of singles in there as well, but having a look at these guys, who are they? What we've found is that there's no definite pattern, but a lot of them are off shearlings, a lot of them are off older ewes, obviously a lot of them are foster lambs, but the shearling ones are something that we can do something about. because what we've tended to do is, having identified that, is we've said, well, we do need to prioritise shearings. We do need to give them an extra little bit of TLC, the better grazing, the bit longer feeding, to give them that help to avoid a lot of their lambs being down in this area at 8 weeks. You could use growth rates. This is just an example of lamb finishing patterns. There's all sorts of ways that you can begin to look at just how well lambs are doing and turning your finishing pattern into a bit of a growth rate curve as well. The information's there, it's available to you if you want to have a look. And finally, just to leave you with a few ideas, this is just a little bit of a performance level example to give you an idea. Here we've got high, so creep system, yeah, we'd need to be rocking and rolling at 360, 370 grams a day to make a full creep system really meet its targets and get that efficiency. And remember that these lambs here, 125 grams a day, compared to these guys around about here, these are going to eat twice as much. They're going to cost you twice as much dry matter, energy, however you want to look at it, to actually get to the same weight at that level of daily live weight gain compared to up here. So I want to leave you with that and invite any questions, Amy, if that's okay.
Lovely, thanks very much, Lesley. So yeah, if anybody's got any questions, if you just want to type them into the box on the right hand side of your screen, I will go through them in a second. Whilst I'm waiting for some questions to come up, I'd just like to remind you all that the presentation has been recorded this evening, so it'll be available on the AHDB YouTube channel, along with all the other previous webinars. And Lesley's also mentioned the Feeding the Ewe document that's just been printed, but if you wanted a copy of that, it is available on our website. If you just click through to the BRP section, you can find it there. Right, so first question, what are the body condition score targets for ewes at tupping and lambing and weaning, please?
That depends a little bit on your system, but thinking about a lowland type of system, then at tupping we're looking at a target of around about 3.5. I normally would have said 3.5, but with the KPI project, I would really seriously now be tending towards the slightly higher. And that means that during pregnancy, we try and avoid losing too much, but that gives you a much better chance of ending up with a ewe that's still a good condition score 3 at lambing, which is really where we want to be.
Okie doke, thank you. Would appreciate some guidance on how early we should worm. We've got this wrong in the past and left it and regretted it.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a really difficult one, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, that's a whole webinar in itself, but let's deal with the nematodirus. So what I would say to people is, please go on to the Scots website. If you just Google sustainable control of parasites in sheep, it will come up. Go on there, and there's a nematodirus forecasting system on there. Find your nearest weather station and just see what your risk is. And then there's a little risk assessment table that you can carry out. So with nematodirus, generally speaking, it's going to hit lambs between about 6 and 12 weeks, okay? Now you couldn't see them actually eating, but the 2 little lambs that were grazing, if they are grazing at 3 and 4 weeks of age, and at that time there's a big hatch in nematodirus, they will get hammered at that stage, okay? So you need to be thinking in terms of treating them at 7 to 14 days after the peak hatches, after that risk period is predicted. Now that might be at 6 weeks, it might be at 12 weeks. You've really got to go in there and look at those risk factors and make a decision. We can't be more prescriptive about that than that, really. Now this year, for most lowland areas in the country, we're already past peak risk and coming back down the other side. So if you've got lambs that are now sort of like 4 or 5 weeks of age, the chances are they're not really going to move. They've missed the peak hatch, but you've got to be really careful that you don't take that as gospel, because if you've got a north-facing field, then that could be a week or 10 days or a fortnight behind the rest of the farm. So you've really got to sit down and give it some thought.
Okay, thank you. What's the best way to encourage creep feeding at early stages?
Number one, get it out there soon enough. I think the mistake that a lot of people make when they're going to creep feed is they think, oh, the lambs won't take anything till they're 3 or 4 weeks of age, and therefore I won't put it out till then. Get it out sooner. Have it out by a fortnight. It's a pain because it means you've got to put a little bit in, little and often, and keep it fresh. But if it also coincides with when you're still feeding mum a little bit, then that helps. You know, if you can sort of put the creep feeder so that it's not too far away, and when mum's eating, they can go and have a little bit too. But I think the main thing is get it out there early so it becomes a bit of a game. We go and play around the creep feeder and, oh, there's something tasty in there. Keep it fresh and make it palatable in the first place. Don't expect them to go in there and eat whole cereals from the word go, because they ain't going to like it very much.
Okay. What have the trials found about the best method for cobalt supplementation?
Now, that's the $64,000 question. What the trials have told us is that it's actually a lot more difficult to supplement cobalt than we thought. Okay. Now, what we have to understand about cobalt is that in young lambs, so pre-ruminant lambs, they actually need some vitamin B12. They don't need huge amounts, they need more and more. Once the lamb starts to ruminate, and obviously it's going to start producing its own vitamin B12 then from cobalt. So cobalt deficiency tends to kick in when the lambs get a little bit older. But certainly, you know, beyond 8 weeks, if there's a serious cobalt deficiency, then it may well start to show. One of the issues that we've got is that it is actually really difficult for us to pick up some of the boluses actually providing very much cobalt when we start going looking for it in the blood, and when we start looking for the performance differences. So that's not to say that they're definitely not working, but we are finding some issues with that. And so what we tend to find is that if you like, the best way to supply cobalt, but the least practical, is to drench it in. But you've got to do it every 7 to 10 days. So you've really got to be careful that you think hard about it. That's not a very satisfactory answer, but it's not a very satisfactory situation with cobalt. Selenium's a lot easier. Cobalt is more difficult.
Okay. You mentioned earlier that light lambs are often from younger ewes. Should we be expecting shearlings to rear twins?
There's a school of thought that says no. I mean, if we look at the Warwick work, Laura Green's work on mastitis, then it was quite clear there that from that point of view, you know, it was a lot safer just to leave a shearling with one and take one lamb away. Now, the practicality of that is difficult. But if we are going to leave 2 lambs on a shearling ewe, then we need to take responsibility for the fact that they do need more help than a ewe. And I think that has been underestimated in the past. So that, you know, what you have to remember is they don't have that buffer of body condition that an older ewe will have. They are effectively, as a shearling, still got a little bit of growing and a little bit of maturing to do. So they don't have that backstop to fall back onto. So giving them the priority grazing, an extra bit of feed, maybe feeding that a little bit longer, and maybe if they've got twin lambs on them and things are struggling a little bit, thinking in terms of supplying a little bit of creep to take some pressure off, then that's probably more practical. But certainly the argument has been made, and it does have some merit.
Okay. Just coming back to the point that you made about cobalt and selenium, we're just after some clarification. Would you advise boluses for selenium deficiency then?
If you know you've got selenium deficiency, then yes, I think, you know, the selenium boluses, we can pick up the increase in the plasma with selenium boluses, and I would be relatively happy with that. I think the issue comes as to how long the boluses actually last. So, you know, again, what I would encourage people to do is, you know, if you're going to start doing something like that, then leave yourself a group of untreated animals and at least try and prove to yourself that you are getting a benefit. And then also keep monitoring, because you need to know if they're not lasting as long as you think that they should be. I know there's one lot of boluses on the market now which are saying that they last for 12 months in terms of cobalt. And, you know, obviously I can't say which ones it is, but in practice, they're not.
Okie doke, excellent. What can be done to get shearling ewes to have more milk?
Well, I mean, obviously feeding in late pregnancy is really important. So shearlings, keeping the condition on them, and feeding really well in late pregnancy. And even if, obviously when we were researching the Feeding the Ewe book, the development of the udder is really, really important. And we also know that some of the capability of an animal to milk is set when she's a fetus herself. So the whole thing fits together. So rearing shearlings, hitting growth targets, feeding them well in late pregnancy, and then looking after them in that early stages of lactation. It's a complete package.
Okay. Just one about orphan lambs. Do you have any tips for introducing orphan lambs that have been on milk powder to grazing outside without getting bloat?
Not particularly, no. I mean, I think, you do have to introduce some fibre into their diet before you just chuck them out onto grazing, and then try and just, take a few days over the introduction. But, I mean, a lot depends on how you do it, whether you're going to wean them abruptly or not. But I would say, introduce some fibre into their diet, at least give them a chance, and then introduce them to the outside gradually if you can.
Okay. What protein levels do lambs need to grow? Is grass always high enough in protein?
It most certainly is. And actually, even for milking ewes, again, when we research this, if you've got really good sward out there and those ewes have got plenty of grazing to go out and it's a good quality sward, there's plenty of protein in grass for ewes to be milking, and there's definitely enough protein in there for lambs to meet their requirements too.
Okay, we've a couple of questions about ewe lambs. So we often tup ewe lambs. Will this affect subsequent fertility and lambing? And is she more likely to produce a smaller lamb?
With ewe lambs, it depends on how they're managed. So, I mean, there's two schools of thought. I mean, the ewe lambs that are really well managed, and they're left with just one lamb, they're weaned early, and I would always say, don't put too much pressure on them, probably creep feed ewe lambs so you can get them away. Then, their productivity can be better because they've lambed before, and they know what it's all about, and as shearlings, they're a lot better proposition. Unfortunately, a lot of ewe lambs go completely the other way. We ask too much of them, we stunt them, they're not in as good a condition as they should be going to the ram as shearlings, and then things just spiral downwards the whole time. So they've really got to be treated as a separate group, and really looked after, given a chance, lambs weaned early, and then given a good rest and get them back round as shearlings.
Okay, excellent. If anybody's got any more questions, just keep typing them into the box on the side of your screen. Lesley, just whilst we're waiting for some more questions to come in, did you want to touch on any more health issues in particular that might affect lamb growth rates and that kind of thing? I know you didn't get a chance to go through everything that you wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, obviously somebody was asking about worms earlier on, and I just covered the nematodirus thing off. One of the things as well is that people will say, well, when do the other worms start kicking in? And I would say that you probably, in terms of doing any fecal egg counting, you need to be thinking about starting to have a look at lambs from that respect when they're about 6 or 7 weeks of age. Now, again, one of the other things about even worm control is that when lambs are performing really well and they're on good quality swards and they're not being forced to eat down to the bottom, then you will also find that they will withstand what apparently could be a higher worm challenge compared to lambs that are under stress. So you can't say you need to start worming lambs at a certain stage. What we can say is you need to start doing some monitoring from about that stage. So this year I would say the worm activity is already picking up. We're already starting to see some activity. Even in samples people are doing now. So people who've got lambs that are coming up for that 6-week stage at the end of April, I would say you definitely need to start doing some monitoring.
Okay, we've just had one more question come in.
Okay.
What is the best way to prevent foxes taking lambs? Have you any experience of this?
But apart from a shotgun. Uh,
Yeah.
Electric fencing works nicely. They don't like a nice hot wire. And the other thing, I mean, foxes obviously can. I mean, you know, we've all been in a field, and a fox has sort of walked across the field, far end of the field in front of us. They can be very brazen, but again, you know, a lot of the time they're looking for the weaker lambs. So good, fit, healthy lambs are a bit less likely to be got by the fox. But you know, where there is a big problem, they don't like electric fences. That is for sure.
Okay. Were you going to say something else then, Lesley? Sorry, before I cut you off
No,
about
no,
health.
no.
You finished?
No,
Okay.
I'm just going to say about it was just about the worms, and you know, it is revving up to be. I think the way things are at the moment, it could be quite a tricky year. I don't know about where the listeners are thinking at the moment, but we certainly here in Northamptonshire are very, very dry. So if we don't get rain in the next couple of weeks, then the worms will probably just have a little bit of a siesta because it will be too dry for them. You know, they do need, they go up the blades of grass and they sit in droplets of water waiting to be eaten. So if it's very dry, they tend to just sort of hide around in the bottom waiting for some water to come along. And then what will happen is it will rain and the whole blooming lot will come out at once. So, you know, again, we just need to be aware that it could be a bit of a tricky season and we need to just be ahead of them.
Okay. Will worms affect growth rate without obvious scouring?
Yes, absolutely. The slide that I showed where, you know, there's two lovely looking lambs, you wouldn't be able to tell. You know, you can lose up to half of your growth rate without any obvious scouring. Once you get to the big scoury stage, what that means is there's enough worms in there to permanently damage their gut. So again, this is where monitoring is so important, because while we don't want people worming more than they need to, obviously, what we do want is for you to worm them when they need it. So if you're monitoring your fecal egg counts, then the chances are you're going to get in there and get an earlier warning and be able to treat before you've lost too much and target it better.
Are the worms capable of surviving in a clamp now that grass silage is being taken?
Yes, they are. It's interesting actually. If they're in a clamp, I would say much less so, because the pH obviously in a clamp is relatively low. But where you get big bales, I wouldn't say that it's something we need to be really worried about, but I remember, and some people will be old enough that are listening, in the foot and mouth year, where we had lots of sheep trapped in lots of places. I had a flock not that far away from here, and he was feeding big bale silage, and the lambs had to stay in for weeks, and we had an outbreak of nematodirus in the lambs, and the only explanation was that those lambs must have picked up the nematodirus from the silage. And when we got down to it, we did find out the batch of silage that was fed at around that time did come off a field that had had a massive problem the year before. So never say never. I don't think it's something we need to get too wound up about, but in big bales, yeah, with those higher pHs, they can survive.
Okay, just another one come in. We have 8-week lambs on creep with dirty back ends, but fecal egg counts have come back below 200 eggs per gram. Any ideas?
Well, it could be at that stage. Have they just started to really tuck into the creep? Because quite often the first sign that lambs are really just getting stuck in is that you get a few mucky bums because they've suddenly decided it's a good idea and they've taken a lot, so they've given themselves bellyache. The other option might be there could be a little bit of coccidiosis. I don't know whether the fecal egg counts have looked at that. The other thing is do another fecal egg count fairly quickly, I would say, because what you've got to remember at a fecal egg count is that it's giving you a snapshot in time of a while ago. So it's only telling you about the adult worms producing eggs at that time. So you just need to be a little bit careful how you interpret that. But my guess would be, if you were to ignore the mucky bottoms and look at the lambs without their mucky bums and ask yourself, do these lambs actually look okay? If the answer to that is yes, then I would say it's probably a nutritional scour.
Excellent. Okay. I think the questions have ceased, so we'll call it a day at that. Thank you very much, Lesley, for sharing your expertise with us this evening, and a big thank you all for you all for logging in and listening. Just a reminder that, as I said before, the webinar will be on YouTube, and you guys will all receive an email with the YouTube link on it. So once again, a very big thank you to Lesley, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.